So as Peter said, I can't think of a better way to kick off a forum themed collaborative leadership than to talk about the founding of B Lab and the acceleration of the B Corp movement. 30 fellows involved in some capacity since inception. So I'm Joanna Reese. I'm a Henry Crown Fellow from the 6th class, and I get to moderate this discussion, and including...
I'm Andrew Kasoy from the High Five class, 5th class of Henry Crown Fellows.
I'm Brian Trelstad from the One for All class.
I'm Watson Petersik from the Kilimanjaro class in South Africa.
So I'm going to start with Andrew. So you're one of the 3 co-founders of B Lab, and Andrew describes his Henry Crown Fellowship project as a dud. So my question to you is, how did your dud project lead to the founding of this movement?
My dud project was a terrible idea, and actually everybody in my class told me it was a terrible idea, and I decided I should try to pursue it anyway, and it promptly went nowhere, and it actually then took 5 years from the time that I started my Henry Crown Fellowship to realize that actually I wasn't like a solo entrepreneur. That what worked for me actually was collaborative leadership, and that the best way that I could try to come up with a project and make a difference was actually to try to do that with some other people. And so we started B Lab really as the Crown Fellow project of one of my partners, Jay Cohen Gilbert, who was in the Infinite class, I think.
And you nominated Jay, correct?
I nominated Jay, and he and I and our third partner, Bart Houlihan, who later became a Crown Fellow as well, we're all kind of thinking about some different things. We had all come from the private sector, and we had all had this idea that business ought to be used as a force for good, that because business could attract capital and talent at scale, that we could use it as a force for good.
Weren't Bart and Jay running a basketball apparel and footwear company?
Yeah.
So how did that go to business as force for
So
social good?
Bart and Jay started a company that I was one of the first investors in with my $5,000 out of college, called And One, which is a basketball footwear and apparel company. They famously made trash-talking T-shirts that people wore on the basketball court that said things like, "If I give you $5, will you go home?" Or maybe less politically correct, "Your game's uglier than your girlfriend." They had the experience of starting a business that I was an investor in, but that later brought in institutional capital. And as it grew, it came a time, and they had built lots of values into that business. And when it came time to sell the business, the investors who were controlling that sale said, "Well, you have to sell it to the highest bidder because that's what the law says. Your fiduciary duty is to maximize value to your shareholders." And so the person who was the highest bidder was the person who saw the most opportunity to get rid of all the really great things that they did, including having like a really high standard for manufacturing in emerging markets and the way they treated their own employees. And that was a pretty searing experience to see all of those things go out the window in a business that they had built together.
Mm-hmm. And so you got together for beers.
So we got together for beers.
Beer always a good motivator for new ideas.
And you know, I wish I could say that I was the kind of person who has like an epiphany and the next day, you know, changed my life. But really, this was like a process that started with being a Crown Fellow and recognizing that there was something more to my private sector career than just making money or just making more. But one that took a bunch of years, and it took a lot of beers and wine and other things with 2 really good friends who had the same instinct to get to the point that we recognized that what we ought to do is actually start a nonprofit, but a nonprofit that could build the market infrastructure that could allow all businesses to collaborate together to use business as a force for good and change the way we think about capitalism. So the idea was really the evolution of capitalism from a model that's all about building wealth for shareholders to one that's all about creating value for society.
And have to comment that your participation on the board of Echoing Green with another Crown Fellow, Cheryl Dorsey, was part of the inspiration for you to...
Yeah, I mean, the inspiration for me, right after I became a Crown Fellow, I ended up on the board of an organization called Echoing Green. Cheryl Dorsey, I don't think is here, but is the executive director of that organization. It's an amazing funder of social entrepreneurs. And one of the things they were starting to see was more and more social entrepreneurs who, instead of starting nonprofits, were starting for-profit businesses. But as I started working with some of those social entrepreneurs, trying to help them figure out how to raise capital for those businesses, there was this recognition that the capital markets weren't built for businesses that actually have a mission other than just making money. We don't have legal structures to support them. We don't have standards to help us tell the difference between a good company and just good marketing. It was that recognition of working with Cheryl and a bunch of those Echoing Green fellows that helped us to realize that we needed to build that market infrastructure to help all businesses.
So for Linda's benefit, to explain what a B Corp is, succinctly, if you can explain what a B Corp is in comparison to a traditional corporate structure.
So a B Corp is a certification that we provide. Our organization is called B Lab. We're a nonprofit. A B Corp is a company that meets higher standards of social and environmental performance, accountability, and transparency. And they do that by actually measuring their impact on all of their stakeholders in a transparent way for everyone to see. And they also do it by actually changing their legal accountability so that they are accountable not just to their shareholders, but also to their stakeholders. And there are now 1,400 of those companies that are certified B Corps in 42 countries around the world. So this isn't just a US idea, it's become a global movement. And a lot of that has happened because lots of members of the AGLN have played really important roles, as you saw in that video, in helping to grow that movement into a global one. But all of those businesses are unified by a common goal of redefining success in business.
Great. And just one more question for you. Was it hard to get those initial companies to sign up?
Yes.
I heard a story that you had to strong arm.
Yeah, so
Andrew Lowry
first of all,
from Method.
several of there were 13 B Corps when we started in the summer of 2007, so 8 years ago. At least 2 of them were Henry Crown Fellows, Adam Lowry from Method Home Products and Jeff Mendelson, or were AGLN Fellows, Adam Lowry and Jeff Mendelson from New Leaf Paper. And since then, many others. But yeah, to get those first 13, essentially, we had to do things like bum rush Adam in his office and essentially handcuff him. But those 13 businesses, just like all 1,400 of them, are leaders. They're people who want to use their business to lead in a way that they, more loudly than they could through their own business. And so in every one of those cases, they're people who've just sort of said, like, I'm in, without really knowing what they were in for.
So Brian, you were probably one of those I'm in. You got involved with B Lab when you were at Acumen with Jacqueline Novogratz. What got you involved?
Yeah, so I was the chief investment officer of Acumen Fund, which invested in many of these businesses who were trying to save the world, including a couple of Henry Crown Fellows like Jordan Castle at Vision Spring, Bruce Robertson at GADCO. And we were trying to help them measure their social and environmental performance. And we were building the tools ourselves. And it was actually around the summer of 2007 here, Peter Reiling brought the Aspen network of development entrepreneurs together, a number of peer organizations that were working in emerging markets, TechnoServe, Endeavor, Root Capital, and others, where we were all struggling with the same problem of trying to measure the performance of these companies and then communicate it in a way that was comparable. And that was at the same time that the B Lab guys were getting going, mostly domestically. And we recognized as a group that to measure the performance of a business, whether it's the financial or operating or social or environmental performance, you really need to compare its performance against the past, against its plans, but most importantly against its peers. And without some kind of common infrastructure, you're never going to get to that third point. And the capital markets are mostly about comparing peer companies, and the sort of sustainable and impact investing space would fall down on itself if we couldn't find a way to compare peer performance of similar companies or peer performance of similar funds. So we recognize that this was a collective action problem from the get-go, and we're excited to see that the B Lab guys were thinking about adding emerging markets. So it was one of the early ones to be on the Emerging Market Standards Council, because the business practices for what it takes to be well-run, have good governance, employment standards in the United States are pretty different here versus sort of India or Kenya, for example. And so we worked to try and translate the standards to be something that would be relevant for our portfolios.
So I was talking with the Inter-America Development Bank around an Endeavor fund, and they said, oh, you need to get a GEARS rating from B Lab. What's a GEARS rating?
So a GEARS rating is the Global Impact Investment Rating System, or standard. I don't know, the acronyms are numerous. It essentially asks each fund to rate each company within its portfolio that rolls up, and your Endeavor as a GEARS-rated fund would rate each of the companies it invests in.
Whether they're B Corps or not.
Whether they're B Corps or not, it's just a set of questions, and it gives them a score on, again, employment practices, governance practices, environmental practices, and then the fund's own practices as a fund manager are also rated. Mm-hmm. And you can then be compared, and as more and more investors are interested in impact and sustainable investing, a GEARS rating is both a directional indication of your impact and a signal to the market that you take impact and sustainability seriously.
And just a quick measure, how many funds now have GEARS ratings?
Almost 100.
Almost 100. Fantastic. So one of the big questions that keeps coming up when I talk to people about B Corp, they said, how did you get states to change laws to be certified, to be able to have a legal designation as a B Corp?
So one of the things we realized when we started was that in a lot of countries and a lot of states around the US, the law doesn't even allow, corporate law doesn't even allow for you to consider your stakeholders. You could actually have the risk of being sued by your shareholders if you've thought about something other than profit. And so that made us realize, well, there's a systemic problem here, and the only way to address a systemic problem is to change the system. Like, we need new rules for a new game. And so we literally wrote on a blank piece of paper, like, if you were going to have a corporation that actually was accountable to something other than just maximizing profit, what would it look like? And so we got some lawyers in a room, and we created something called a benefit corporation. So it's like a regular corporation, like a C Corp, but that has some higher standards of fiduciary duty to consider all stakeholders. And then we went and started asking some state legislators to consider passing laws in their state that would make that possible. And over the course of the years, 31 states have actually done that. And a bunch of Crown Fellows and Rodell Fellows have been really involved in that process. So like Deval Patrick signed that legislation in Massachusetts when he was the governor there. Vince, I don't know if Vince Sheehan is here from South Carolina, but yeah, led the charge in South Carolina in a pretty partisan environment to create like a unanimous vote in both houses of his legislature to pass Benefit Corp legislation there. And then all of that led to Leo Strine and Jack Markell, both part of this network, taking the lead in getting Delaware to pass this legislation. And Delaware, for those of you who don't know, is the home of corporate law in the US. So almost all of the Fortune 500 is incorporated in Delaware. And so we knew if we ever wanted to scale, if we ever wanted public companies to be able to become B Corps and to use their businesses as a force for good, we needed to be able to have Delaware create a new corporate form. And so like a great turning point was really thanks to Leo Strine and Jack Markell's leadership, passing Benefit Corp legislation in Delaware.
And I hear everyone in Delaware talks about Warby Parker. Why is that?
Well, Warby Parker, a Crown Fellow, David Gilboa, is one of the founders of Warby Parker. They're a certified B Corp, and they're still a private company, but they're incorporated in Delaware, and so they're working through that process of getting their investors on board to become a benefit corporation in Delaware.
Fabulous. So you mentioned that so much of the growth now of B Corps is outside the U.S. How many outside?
So about 40% of those 1,400 certified B Corps are now outside of the U.S. And if I had to guess, it'll look more like 60-40 the other way in the next 18 months or so. So this is increasingly becoming a global movement, and very quickly the U.S. will just be one small piece of it.
So Watnan, you got involved. You're part of, you can say it specifically, but a global advisory board for B Corp. Talk about your participation.
I've been a member of what is called the Emerging Markets Standards Advisory Council. It's a bit of a handful, but B Corp basically has two sets of rating standards. One is for emerging markets, and the other is for for developed markets, and the other is for emerging markets. So I was asked to join this by my predecessor, my Asian rep predecessor, who wasn't actually part of the AGLN. And I was quite skeptical at first because I thought a global rating standard for all countries, can that really work? But then I saw that the founders were members of the AGLN, Henry Crown Fellows, and thought, well, it can't be that bad, so let's try it. So I joined, and that council in itself is an exercise in collaborative leadership because it has about, I think, 10 to 12 people at varying times across 4 continents. So we get on the phone every quarter at all hours of the night and day and discuss the standards. And I've been very impressed with how the B Lab people have been willing to listen to different voices, different inputs from all around the world. But what I'm really excited right now is the next frontier for B Corp is Asia. They have a few companies now in Asia, I think about 10, but they haven't really pushed the movement to Asia, and that's the next best initiative through Bart Houlihan, who is another Henry Crown Fellow, right? Yeah. And the reason I'm so excited about it, because in Asia, we have big problems, and they're the type of problems that unless we have collaborative leadership on a grand scale, they're not going to get solved. And business plays a key part in that for a few reasons. One, business in Asia is really the repository of a lot of the resources, and I don't just mean money. It's human resources. The best and brightest tend to go in the private sector now. Logistics, everything that makes the ability of problem-solving solutions be able to scale. Secondly, we don't have the non-profit philanthropic foundations and supporting networks and human resources that the U.S. and other European countries have. So we need a different alternative. And the third factor is a lot of our companies are still family companies. And family companies in Asia, a lot of times they do their for good activities through their corporations. So it's very fertile ground for B Corps. And what's happening now is a number of governments in Asia are recognizing this. So for example, in Indonesia, 2% of net profits of natural resource companies have to be somehow expended in social causes. And a similar law was recently passed in India for companies above a certain size. Now the issue when you have laws like this, though they're well-intentioned, one, there's a lot of ability to have abuse, particularly given the environments which they operate. So the role of an independent rating agency which provides a framework for assessing what really constitutes a socially responsible or sustainable activity is very, very important. Now where we need help on is to get this to work in Asia, given how difficult it is to work with government in any country or the social sector in country and put it all together. We will need the help of people on the ground. And I've already started recruiting for Andrew, especially among the India Fellowship, and India is very much a leader in this area in the region. So it's a very exciting time for us.
Fabulous. And I also just got involved with B Corp because I'm part of something called the B Team, which is a group of business leaders led by Richard Branson from Virgin, Paul Pullman from Unilever, and Jochen Zeitz, who was the CEO of Puma, who said, we can't leave the world's problems up to governments and nonprofits. Business has to take a leadership role, and we're going to have our businesses implement best practices. And I thought, why are we backwards engineering all these companies once they get big? Why aren't we starting them with the right principles? So I came up with this idea of Born B, and I contacted the three of you through our connection through the fellowship and said, can we partner together in some way and really reach out to the legal and the venture capital community? With the ultimate goal that in their term sheets, they would insist that the companies they fund are B Corps rather than C Corps. So we're just starting on that initiative. And I think, by the way, we have a pocket of funding I haven't talked to you about yet.
Cool.
So it'll allow us to really expand it in a big way. But we're excited about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I don't know how many of you have seen the work that the B Team is doing, but it's really important, I think, like sort of at both ends of the scale. I mean, you have some leaders of big public companies all over the world, like Paul Pullman at Unilever or Guillermo Leal at Natura in Brazil, which is also a B Corp.
Wasn't he the first public B Corp?
They're the first public company to become a B Corp and actually just go out and tell their shareholders, like, this is how we do business, so we want you to vote to change our legal structure. And they got a unanimous vote of all their shareholders, big institutional shareholders all over the world, who recognized that this was actually a better way of doing business. It's a better way of creating long-term value. And in having that partnership and having those leaders, the B team has been able to have a very big, like a big megaphone, and be able to really talk to business leaders all around the world about a different way of doing business. And at the same time, this idea of Born B, of getting businesses to just start this way, like put it in the DNA from the beginning, have a different legal structure. It means that then when those questions of like trade-offs come up as the business is scaling, there aren't any questions about it. It's just part of how the business is run.
So I'm going to open up for questions from the audience in just a minute, but you've been working on this initiative for 8 years, and you say we've made a dent. And so I'd love for each one of you to weigh in. What can people in this room do to get engaged and help propel this? So when we talk about success in business, we don't talk about it's just about profits for that business, but how do we have positive impact for the world? So what can they do?
So, I have a long list. It starts with if you run a business or you work in one or you're influential in one, make it a B Corp. Make it accountable to more than just making money. Make it accountable to do something transformative for society.
And they can go right to your website and learn how to do that.
Yep, bcorporation.net. But there's lots of things you can do even if you work for a big company. Big corporates have a huge amount of impact through their supply chains, as an example. And so the same tools that Brian was talking about using as an investor and that Watanan has been helping to create on this Standards Advisory Council can be used by all businesses to benchmark their whole supply chain and understand the impact, the social and the environmental impact of those businesses across their whole supply chains. And you can also, there are lots of ways in which you can be a part of this movement in other ways. If you have capital and you're an investor, why not put it to work in a fund like Brian's fund, the Bridges Fund, where they are trying to invest in businesses like B Corps here. And there are lots of those, like Jacqueline's Acumen Fund, that do that in emerging markets. So there are tremendous opportunities to be the change as an individual in how you consume or what you invest in or where you choose to work, as well as what you choose to do with the business you run. And there's a huge opportunity for us all collaboratively to build that movement together.
Brian and Watanan, any other?
Yeah, just briefly, Andrew referenced I'm raising a fund. It's my Henry Crown project. We're investing in underserved markets here in the US. And I think that the B Corps are just the tip of the iceberg. We're investing in founder owners, oftentimes educators, clinicians who've built their businesses with an ethic of service. And when we come to them and say, hey, you've got to do this B Corp Gears rating thing, they're hugely excited about it because it finally reflects and captures the values with which they built the business to begin with. So I think that this is just the tip of the iceberg. I would echo Andrew's comment less self-servingly, but more generally. Ask your wealth advisor where your assets are going vis-a-vis impact and sustainable investing. We're seeing a huge interest among advisors, but there's not yet the capability and familiarity. So bring to them the knowledge that B Corps exist, and that will help connect the dots between your interest in seeing change and the B Corps that are out there.
I think from the emerging market side, the way that B Corp works is they partner with local institutions or companies in each of the local environments in which they operate. So in Asia and also I'm sure in Africa, they will be looking for partners to guide them through how to best adapt and work with the B Corp standards to suit the priorities of the local communities in which they wish to operate.
Any audience questions? Yes, back there.
Hey, Jason Primo, Liberty Fellowship. Question more for Brian. How do you envision, especially venture or institutional capital, to maintain the B Corp focus as a company scale? So what I mean by that is, I'm in venture capital as well. Most of us set up funds with a 5-year investing horizon, 10-year 10-year lifespan, and if you don't achieve liquidity events, typically exiting them, then literally companies get branded the walking dead. Yeah. So will a B Corp become a victim of its own success? So we want them to grow, and most companies are not able to organically fund growth. They're going to need more outside capital, so the visionary founders end up becoming the minority in the company. And so I'd love for you to expand on how you set up a typical fund with investors, right, and deal with the exit situation.
Yeah, and you can find me afterwards. I'll just answer quickly. I think there are more and more investors at each stage of the capital cycle that care, including strategic purchasers. There are more and more exits that are happening into large operating companies, whether it's a Unilever buying, a Ben & Jerry's, or whether it's Bain buying Tom Shoes, where from what I understand, very outside in, Bain's acquisition of Tom Shoes had a very, very long debate over the buy one, give one, and that was just off the table from the beginning. So I think that the founder owners and the investors are able to build into the very DNA of the company that creates the enterprise value that the successor buyer wants, the principles of B Corps. So I think there's a little bit of friction in the capital markets right now, and it's a great question, but I have confidence that companies will be able to scale and stay true to mission. Yeah.
And just as Blake, who is the founder of Tom's, is a B team leader and is also going to be the key champions of the Board and B effort within the B team. So.
And I would say, this point about like the spectrum in the capital markets, I think that's changing really quickly. You're not just seeing it with small venture capital funds creating like a little impact investing funds. Almost all of the major Silicon Valley venture firms and almost all of the big private equity firms have now made investments in these kinds of businesses. And increasingly large institutional investors in the public markets recognize that these environmental and social and governance factors have a huge impact on financial return, either because it allows them to mitigate risk more effectively, or it allows them to see opportunities that lots of others aren't seeing. And so we see more and more of the big institutional investors. BlackRock is the largest institutional investor on earth. They manage $4 or $5 trillion. And they recently came out with a report talking about the value creation that comes from thinking about those like B Corp type factors in their investments, and they're perfectly happy to have those in their portfolio in the public markets. And so I think that helps solve that exit problem, that these businesses, even as they scale and want to access the public capital markets, will be able to do that while maintaining their mission. But the legal accountability matters because it allows the founders to hold other investors and the board hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they actually maintain that mission, even as they're scaling.
Other questions? Diane?
I love what you're doing, and I agree that it's a systemic problem, so happy you're tackling it that way. But my question is around, do you have case studies where you're measuring successes or improvements for each of the companies as well? Like, can you point to the fact that X wages have been increased? Or how are you measuring from within the company outside of the growth of B Corp?
You mean to take that? So every company that gets certified as a B Corp goes through an impact assessment. The impact assessment is what's been created by the Standards Advisory Council that's independent of B Lab, that Brian used to serve on and that Wachana now serves on for the emerging markets. And they create a set of questions for a business that asks about its impact on all of its stakeholders.
And it's not just a set, it's a broad set.
It's a broad set. It's a couple hundred questions. And those questions change depending on whether the business is in an emerging market or a developed market. They change whether the business is a manufacturing business or a services company or a financial services business. And they change based on the size of the business. There are things that companies that have 1,000 or 10,000 employees need to focus on that a 4-person local business doesn't need to. And so companies are assessed on all of those questions, and then there's like a review and a verification process. And so we're able to see then from year to year changes in performance. And so we've been able to see lots of companies, like Etsy is a good example. It's a company that just went public, that's a B Corp, that when they first got certified, they just barely met the standard. You have to get an 80 out of 200 on this impact assessment, and they got 80.1. And they owned it transparently. They said, you know, we got certified, we're really excited, but barely. And then over the course of the next several years, they have like worked hard to improve their performance, and I think they now have like 115 or something like that.
So we are out of time. I encourage anyone who had questions to come up and talk to Andrew, Brian, or Watnan after, and thank you all